This is Nick Black in Los Angeles, and I'm at the prestigious Argyle Hotel here in West Hollywood, and today I'm talking to actor and director Corey Allen. Corey will go down in film history as the guy who played cat and mouse with James Dean, and sadly he lost. Thanks for taking time out to talk to us today, Corey.
Pleasure.
I want to start off by asking you, when did you start acting? How did you become interested?
A friend of mine in high school said, let's go to a play reading, and I didn't know what a play reading was, and I said, fine. I accompanied him to the school library. The director lady said, is there anybody else who would like to read? And I said, what do I do? And she said, here's a book, read. I said, out loud. She said, yes. And she cast me in a small role in a high school play. I got my first laugh, and here I am.
It became infectious.
Addictive.
And where was this, Corey?
In a small town outside of Los Angeles, Tujunga, California.
After this high school play, how did it progress after that?
Well, one play led to another, and by the time I graduated high school, I was sure I wanted to go into show business. And I went to UCLA, enrolled in theater arts, got my degree in theater. 3 years later, went into the business.
Was it easy to get into the business? Did you have to have a day job to support yourself?
I sold kids' shoes. But it happened fairly quickly with me. I began reading for plays around town and probably worked in most of the little theaters in Los Angeles until I was scouted by a director making a film. I was going to law school at the same time. Would have failed my first examinations in 12 years of schooling if he hadn't seen me in the play. And 9 days before the examinations were due, he cast me.
Who was the director and what film?
That was Nick Ray, directed Rebel.
What did your family, because show business is a very, I'm going to say a dubious business as well, but it's not an easy business. Did your family approve? I mean, you're going to law school and you want to take up acting.
They were supportive. I think they were bewildered. My image is that they looked at each other and scratched their heads and nodded their heads, and that was their endorsement.
So was Rebel Without a Cause your first film?
No, I'd had several bit parts prior to that, but Rebel was the first major film.
How did these bit parts come about?
I made a reputation for myself in theater, and here in Hollywood, where the industry resides, and I was seen on stage, and I was a very energetic career pursuer. I read for everything I could find, even if it was unreasonably improbable. From theater, I got an agent. I also made a small film at UCLA when I was a student called Time Out of War, which was a 20-minute film for another student's master's thesis. And there were 3 of us actors in that, and that got the Cannes Film Festival Award, Venice Film Festival Award, the American Academy Award, and this was 1952 or 3, and kicked us all into the business. That film, along with my theater work, got me my first agent, who got me the bit roles, and then the larger role in Rebel.
Do you remember how you met up with Nick Ray the first time?
I think my agent called me and said, go see the director at Warner Brothers. He's doing a picture with James Dean. Was
James Dean known then? Because that was his first really breakthrough.
He had just come out in Eden, East of Eden, and I went to see East of Eden, and he had preceded me at UCLA. He had just left when I entered as a freshman, so we had mutual friends. I went to see East of Eden, and it was awesome. My heart leapt, and I learned so much by just watching that film and him in it. Anyway, I went out to Warner Brothers to meet this director that my agent had referred me to, and that was Nick, and he had a picture of Jimmy on the wall. I walked over and looked at the picture of Jimmy and was filled with all kinds of questions about the art form and myself and the future. And
were you apprehensive?
yes, of course I was. The meeting with Nick was a wonderful meeting. I learned just from being around Nick. Then I met Jimmy on the sound stage, and that's a memory.
Tell us of your initial impressions or first impressions of Dean.
Well, having seen him in Eden, there was a crowd scene when the whole family gathers to watch his brother go off to war, and there were all these high-powered actors. Julie Harris, who was already a huge name by that time. She'd done Member of the Wedding, Raymond Massey and Joe Van Fleet. And here were all these people gathered to watch. Van Fleet wasn't in that scene, but she was in the film. To watch the Calvin go off to, not Cal, the brothers, I've forgotten the brother's name, go off to war. And they were all emoting and powerfully, and as all of us at that time would expect. And in the middle of this crowd was a little figure, slight young man, who was doing absolutely nothing. There was not as much going on with him as there is with you and me in this conversation right now. You and I are both expending more energy right now than he did in standing amid these actors. That was a huge lesson to me, to have the guts to do nothing. When I walked on the sound stage for the first time, I was there for a costume fitting. He was sitting on a piece of scenery, and there were all these kids gathered around him and celebrating him. Jimmy was sitting there, again, doing nothing, just kind of obliquely looking at the floor and not participating in this celebration. And I walked over and I felt like I was taking the bull by the horns. And I said, Jimmy, my name is Corey Allen. We're going to be working together. And he barely lifted his head and he looked up at me from under his brows. And he put out a hand and I shook his hand and he said something like, yeah, hello. And I walked away. And that's how we met. There was a lesson in all of that. He was not in any way unpleasant, but he refused to join the worldly pleasantries that we all get caught up in because he was protecting his groundedness. And even that handshake was a memorable lesson for me.
Corey, was he like that in rehearsals as well?
Yes, he was. He expended no more than was necessary for the task at hand. And then when there was time, that was during rehearsals, and when it was time to shoot, he gave everything he had.
In other words, he was basically saving his energy for the moment.
Saving his energy and his sense of reality and his very impressive insight, the depth of insight he had.
Corey, I want to ask you now about the famous cat and mouse scene. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
The Chicky Run?
Yeah, the chicken run.
Yeah, that was shot in 3 different locations. The exteriors were out in the hills outside of Los Angeles, the Malibu Mountains. The interiors of the car were shot on stage by process screen, back projection. The long shots of the car going over the cliff were done somewhere up the coast by the second unit. What can I tell you about it? It was terribly exciting. It was very cold out at night, and the prop master said, "Go on up into my truck and get some long underwear." I said, "Thank you." And running around the back of this huge truck and scrambling up on the tailgate, and there were 5 of me lying there. Likenesses.
Did it give you a bit of a spooky feeling there, Corey?
Yes, it did. And I skidded to a halt.
Did you socialise with Dean? Did you become friendly with him?
Friendly colleagues. We worked well together, but we didn't socialize. Both of us were busy internalizing. I had learned from Jimmy so quickly, including that screening of Eden, to save it, not to go bleeding off at the edges with my energy. So he and I were polite and collaborative, but I don't think we ever saw each other off the set.
Nick Ray was one of the great Hollywood directors, and you had the chance to work with Nick again on Party Girl.
That's the twice that we worked together. Nick was a major figure in my life and my directorial career.
How so, Corey?
I had a habit on the set of Rebel. In order to set myself at ease before a take, I would scream at the top of my lungs to prove to myself that I had the right to do whatever I wanted to do. And some of the youngsters on the film picked up on that habit, and not with any malice or ill will, would run around screaming in my manner.
Sending you up.
Sending me up is what they were doing. And it really didn't bother me. But Nick called a meeting of the cast, and he said to all of us assembled, every one of us has his own way of preparing. And anybody in this film, anybody, makes it difficult for someone else to prepare in his specific manner, he's off the film. It was more than I needed. I certainly didn't need him to say any of that on my account. But what it did teach me was that the director is responsible for the welfare and the working welfare, which includes the emotional welfare of the people that he's working with. It was an early lesson and one that I hope that I've honored.
Can you tell us a little bit about the way Nick Ray worked and how he helped you in your directing career when you started?
Well, the help was majorly that, learning his demeanor and his sense of responsibility for his artists. He worked improvisationally. He cast improvisationally. We didn't read scenes together. We did improvisations, many of them quite physical, because he was looking for the physical freedom and willingness and commitment of his actors, because those of us who were playing the gang had so much physical stuff to do running around. And his improvisations were designed not only to allow us to exercise our physical freedom, but to commit emotionally at the same time. So that was another learning experience for me.
I want to get on to a very interesting film which isn't easily found, Private Property. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Corey? Because that was a pretty major film for you.
I'm sorry that isn't easily found. I think that's a very good film, made by Leslie Stevens, who is a writer. Leslie had, prior to that, written, forgotten the title of it, but it was a film about Le Droit de Seigneur, the right of a nobleman to the first night with the bride of his vassal. Very good play, and a deeply serious play. At the same time, Leslie had come out with a moderate success in a play called Pink Jungle, which was about ladies' undergarment industry, which was a measure of the parameters of Leslie's exercise of his talent. And Private Property had the kind of dark, emotional mood set of the first play. Was it called Bullfight? I think it was called Bullfight, which may have been yet another title, I'm not sure. But it had the dark emotionality of Bullfight and the weird, kinky humor of somebody who wrote Pink Jungle. And Private Property combined those, and it was I don't have an adjective, it was weird.
I want to get on to another prestigious film, Sweet Bird of Youth, directed by Richard Brooks, and had a stellar cast with Paul Newman and Geraldine Page. Can you just tell us a little bit about your memories of that film, Corey?
That was Richard Brooks, another man from whom I learned a lot. I had a very small part in Sweet Bird of Youth, and Richard Brooks knew that I was, by that time, directing my own theater in town. I guess he knew that because he did things like one evening we were on the stage and I had a lot of standing around to do, and he, without turning over his shoulder, he motioned toward me. I was standing behind him, and he motioned with his fingers for me to come up to his side. And I said, "Yes, sir." And he barely looked at me. I don't know if he looked at me at all. And he said, "Get to the point." I said, "Thank you, sir." And I walked away.
Another very well-known director you worked with was a great Hollywood director, George Cukor.
George bewildered me. He would shoot things 18, 19 takes. And after each take, I or other actors would dutifully say, "Well, Mr. Cukor, how can I make this better? What can I do for you?" And he'd say, "Just do it again."
No other explanation.
No other explanation. And we would just do it again and again and again. And I played a rapist in that picture. And I did a rape scene 18 times.
How was it for the poor actress, Corey?
It was Claire Bloom, my honor to work with Claire Bloom, and she was game. It was interesting that there was a scene where I come to the front door of her house, ostensibly to deliver her mail, which I claim was mistakenly put in my mailbox. I'm her neighbor. And it was a simple scene where she opens the door and she's in a black lace, I guess it was a negligee, and my line is, "This was delivered to my house by mistake. I hope you don't mind my ringing your bell." And her line was, "Oh, can I give you coffee or something?" And that was the scene. And George Cukor kept saying, "Again, again, again." And I kept asking, "What do you want?" He said, "Just do it again." About the 6th time, the door opened, and beneath the black lace bodice, she wasn't wearing anything. And there's plenty of lace. She was obscured. But there I was, confronted with this world-class beauty and lady. And I hesitated, and I said, "I think this was delivered by mistake." And George said, "Cut, print."
And that was it. Corey, I want to quickly get on to your directing. How did you segue from acting to directing? Was that a career plan of yours from the start?
No, my acting career began to decline. And at the same time, rather than spend time at the laundromat and the tennis court, a lot of my young actor friends and I decided we'd stay active by forming our own theater. Gee, kids, let's put on a show. And we formed our own theater and played all around the Southwest, traveled shows to Phoenix, San Diego, and I was getting good notices as a director. I directed for our theater as well as acted. And I had a reputation as an actor. So between my notices as a director and my notice that I'd earned as an actor, I got invitations, or I found invitations, to audit on the soundstage of the then blooming TV industry. I audited and hung around and made sure that I was visible on the set with my viewfinder until I was invited to do a 4-part assignment on Dr. Kildare, which was Richard Chamberlain's introduction. And that was the beginning.
Well, Corey, you've done many, many movies, a lot of telemovies, a lot of episodic TV. One I quickly want to get into, because I think there were a lot of problems associated with it, was the Rock Hudson movie Avalanche, a disaster movie.
A disaster, certainly. It's a film that I often tell people I wish would burn in the vaults. Rock was a dream to work with. Lovely, lovely guy. Cast was good. I got to cast many of my very dear friends and who were talents that otherwise unsung, but there were production difficulties.
What exactly were they, Corey?
I think they were reaches of faith between the production company and the cast. That's all I'm comfortable saying.
A lot of episodic TV, Star Trek, Bill Cosby, mysteries.
I took my retirement a year and a half ago. That's when I began to teach at Columbia. I can't say that it was as enjoyable. My joy in it began to wane. I'd had some health problems, and I've got Parkinson's, and I slowed down somewhat, and I was fighting that and attended emotional problems. So I was in a position I didn't have to work, so I was in a position to retire and do other things. And through my entire career, which is about 40 years, I'd always taught when time permitted, and that's how I supported our theater. It seemed like a thing that I wanted to develop.
Okay, Corey. Well, I want to thank you very much for taking time out to talk to us, and all the best with the teaching, and all the best with your health and everything else.
Thank you very much, Nick.